Make sure you're hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribing to the channel. We've had an influx of subscribers as of recently, basically since we did that Friday night mic'd up session. If you're a new subscriber today and this is your first time watching TTD, or this is going to be your first time watching MBR later today when we have Josh Pate on, welcome. I hope you enjoy. I hope you hit that subscribe button. I hope you stick around because we are still, despite the fact that we're about 3 years old around here, we're really in the infancies of the new mission, the new goal, the new home, right? The new vibes. This is all very new around here, and we're glad that you guys have hopped on the train whenever and however you did. So welcome in. Glad to have you guys in with us today. Hey, you guys ever seen that viral video of that old dude having that graph where he's like, this is the line of fucking around. This is the line of finding out.
I use that video probably once a week.
So we've all seen it, right?
Yeah.
We've all seen the fuck around and find out. Well, here's the problem with Georgia's schedule this year. They got one of the longest leashes of fuck around time I've ever seen before they have to maybe potentially find out with regards to their schedule. I mean, we could really look at it and we could sit here, and if you're a pessimist, you could say Auburn week 5 on the road, kind of tough. Right? We can really try to say that's when you might find out. That's when you might find out who you are as a football team. And I would say, I don't know. I don't know if Hugh Freeze is going to have the Auburn Tigers 100% ready to compete against the nation's #1 football team and the nation's most talented and most deep football team week 5 of this college football season, which means your timeline of fucking around before you find out has extended all the way till about November 8th, maybe November 11th. Or November 2nd and 4th? November 4th and November 11th. Ole Miss, Tennessee. That's it. If you really look at the schedule today and you ask yourself honestly, when will Georgia be tested on paper? When will we find out? When will we find out who we are as a football team? That timeline, that intersection point on that graph doesn't exist until way down the plot line. So I'm sitting here asking you guys, and I'm asking you guys, and I'm asking everyone listening today here in August, how long is Carson?
You almost said Carson.
I know. How long is Carson Beck's leash going to be this year? If Carson comes out and plays like an A- quarterback for 9 games, doesn't necessarily light it up, but plays serviceable, plays Georgia quarterback play like it has been over the last, 8 years under Kirby Smart. And then midway through the second quarter against Ole Miss at home, let's just say you're down by 7. He's thrown an interception. You've had an early fumble. Let's say it looks like, the Mizzou game did last year. Let's say something like that happens and Carson Beck has trouble on his horizon. A lot of people will hear this and they'll say, well, how's he going to respond? I have those questions too. My question is, how are you going to respond, Georgia fan? The Georgia fan that always kind of responds to these first moments of with a lot of negativity. You tend to do that sometimes, right? And honestly, I know this about you. You know this about you. And your new quarterback, he knows this about you as well. He knows how brutal fan bases can be because he watched the guy before him. When asked today, what did you learn most from Stetson Bennett's experience as the Georgia quarterback over the last 30 starts? Do you know what his answer was? His answer was, I learned most about how Stetson responded to how all you guys talked about him. How he responded to the narrative being driven around his play. That's what I learned most about the 6-foot former walk-on that started here 30 games. Not how to control the locker room, not how to respond to pressure. Nah. How to handle the brutality that comes from being the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia. How long is that leash with Kirby Smart going to be? How long is that leash with you guys going to be? How long is that leash inside the huddle going to be with this quarterback? I'll be honest with you. I think the leash is going to be relatively long inside the building, and here's why. Because the commitment from Carson Beck and the commitment to Carson Beck has been a very layered approach with Georgia and with Carson from start. They committed to Carson with this offensive identity. They did it back in the spring. If you listen to the way guys have been speaking this fall, they have kind of known Carson's going to be their guy. They have angled towards it. They have installed towards it. They have talked about it within house, knowing, for the most part, with pretty certainty that Carson's going to be the guy. They've been committed to this offensive identity. They are committed to this new offensive identity. They've committed resources to that quarterback, Carson Beck. We talked about it with Aaron Murray 2 nights ago. They went out and got Dominic Lovett. They went out and got Ra Thomas. They went out and got receivers, weapons, right? Passing targets. They didn't go out and get an additional H-back or tight end. They didn't go out and get another running back to help with a run-based offense. No. They went out and got weapons for their processing quarterback. They've committed to rewarding patience around this program at the University of Georgia. If you wait your turn, you will get your run. You will have to lose your job at the University of Georgia if you are upperclassmen and you are willing to stick around. They reward the patience around this program, and they damn sure reward the process. If you buy into the process, if you continue to get better day in and day out, if you buy in to the culture that is set in stone at the University of Georgia, you will get your chance. It's been a layered, committed process to Carson Beck and the University of Georgia this offseason. I think he absolutely will have a longer leash than most people will expect, as long as the narrative around him remains positive. I'll be honest, I think sometimes all it takes is one bad drive or one bad pocket management series where we look a little flustered before people are running to Twitter and saying, oh, this ain't the guy, get Brock in there. You just got to be a lot more patient, particularly with a first-year starter. I mean, this guy has not played competitive starting football for 4 years. This is going to have some growing pains.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say, is people have to expect and just understand that there are going to be growing pains and that this is going to be a little bit of a process. But as you said, you're not going to really find out until later in the season. So that's a good thing in that regard, as you kind of get to work some kinks out and kind of feel the vibe out a little bit until those games come around. But that's also a bad thing in a sense of we may not really find out truly who this offense and Carson Beck is until Ole Miss. But I think he's going to have a pretty long leash because he's earned it at this point.
He certainly has earned it. I just, from his confidence standpoint, he doesn't seem to necessarily be motivated by outside noise, or else he would have already been gone. Like, if this dude cared about what other people were telling him or what other people thought about him, he would already have been transferred to Florida, or he would have already transferred to Alabama. Because I think people forget. I went back and thought about it today. Carson Beck was committed verbally to Alabama and then committed to Georgia. Those are two programs that if you make the decision to go play there, you are embracing competition. That's what you're doing. You're not avoiding it. You're seeking it. You are seeking the opportunity to compete against people who are as talented or more talented than you for the better part of 4 or 5 years. These kids know, they should know. They should know what they're getting themselves into when they do this. Carson certainly has.
So I kind of have a problem with this idea that we're not going to find out about the offense till Ole Miss game. Because if you look back at previous schedules, 2021, it was kind of, all right, we're going to find out as soon as the Clemson game goes, but then there's not really anything between that. And it turns out you've got number 7 Arkansas coming to Athens. Last year, obviously, you had the Missouri episode. I think you'll find out sometime sooner than the Ole Miss game. I think it'll be sooner than late November. But I think you're right about Carson Beck having a longer leash. I will say, though, if he loses the job or if he has to sit, there's a chance that he doesn't win it back. Of these 6 quarterbacks Kirby Smart has named in his time at Georgia, he's named 6 different guys to be starting quarterback. Only 2 of them have finished the season when they started.
Stetson and Jake Fromm.
Yep. Jake Fromm did it twice in 2018 and 19. Everyone else started
And in 18, he didn't even name him. He didn't name him until the fall.
Yeah,
because he did the whole thing where he made Justin Fields a running back.
I think people forget that Grayson Lambert was the starter for the 2016 season.
It
was very brief. It was kind of at the beginning of the UNC game, and then once Jacob Eason got in, it was his offense from that point on. But that's easy to forget.
Now, to be fair, of those 4 guys that got benched, 2 of them were benched in the first game, and the other 2 suffered injuries and never won it back. So, I mean, I think, like you said, he's got a very long leash, but he can also, if he loses his job, it might not be so easy getting it back. Or if, Carson Beck's got a sprained ankle or an oblique injury, he'll be back in 2 weeks. He might not be back. So I think that's where the leash gets short for him. But as far as gameplay goes, it's
I was about to ask, and I'm just thinking out loud, if Kirby's mindset about this topic has changed after watching the maturation process of a super old player in Stetson Bennett. I can't remember how many times even Kirby would say, well, we know what we've got in Stetson, right? The whole reason they didn't even give him reps when JT was there was because they felt like they knew who he was. And then through the 30 starts of him actually winning the job, you can't seriously sit here and tell me that Stetson Bennett game 1 2021 is the same caliber of player that he was when he walked off the field against TCU. He wasn't. He got incrementally better. He got so much better as a football player during that time. And there were so many different little roads and so many different little gaps where Kirby could have easily said, this guy's struggling way too much, turning the damn ball over way too much, not playing like I want to, not playing like quarterbacks should under my system or my football team. We've got to make a change. And every single time he just kept sticking with him. And I wonder if watching that prevail, watching the like I said, the maturation of Stetson over those years, if that maybe has changed his mind with regards to these quarterback discussions. Obviously, we won't know until we actually see Carson Beck struggle and see him stand by that guy in the midst of trouble. But I think it can be some guys can be way too quick to just, there's the struggle point. Let's put Vandergriff in there.
Well, I think from thinking of how Stetson played in the 2021 SEC championship game to how he played in the 2021 college football playoffs, I think even that's a very different quarterback. Stetson played with confidence in the national championship game against Alabama, and we kind of saw him a little bit flustered in the 2021 SEC championship game. And from that point on, though, that was who Stetson Bennett was. He was clutch, he was dependable, and he was a guy that was going to show up in the big moments. So maybe if Carson does struggle a little bit in that first big game that he comes across, who knows? That might be a huge growing point for him that turns him into that next level.
Do you want it to happen early? Like if you're a Georgia fan, do you want kind of like a Mizzou scare against South Carolina to kind of find out? Now we had our first sweater out of the way. Now we can really, get comfortable into competing.
I mean, ideally, you don't want it to happen at all. But if you did, per se, if you had to have it happen, I think having it earlier in the season against a team where you can muster up a win like a South Carolina or a Mizzou, especially in a home environment, I think that's more preferable than maybe being on the road in late November when things really, really matter. I think it also shows that Kirby was more willing to ride out the moment. Stetson Bennett wasn't like consistently great even through last year. There were moments where he looked flustered in the Missouri game. In Kentucky, he didn't have a great game. Even in 2021 in Tennessee, he had a couple of bad moments to start that game, but Kirby stuck with him. I think Kirby is now much more willing to ride out these ebbs and flows than anything. So if Carson Beck has that, I think it'll be fine.
You know what really helps your willingness or your ability to stick with the decision you made? Having 2 national titles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It feels really easy to not question yourself when you're kind of on the top of what you do. And I think we might see examples of that portrayed this season with regards to this quarterback decision. Even though, I'll be honest with you, man, even the quote unquote tough games, Ole Miss and Tennessee, and let's throw South Carolina in the mix. Ain't none of those guys world record defense holders. Like none of those guys are going to have elite defenses. They may not face a top 10, top 15, top 20 defense until December in the SEC championship game. That's almost, to me, you sit here and say that's good news if you're a Georgia fan. To me, as an analyst and as someone who always thinks about this from a coaching perspective, or what would I do if I were the coach of that football team, that scares the piss out of me because I don't know. I'm going to go into the biggest war of the year, December 7th, and I'm not going to know. I'm not going to know who we are on the battlefield. That scares me.